So this is the first of our 3 webinars. We're going to try our best to make this clear and smooth and helpful, but some things may not work with us, may not work out, so we do ask that you bear with us. My name is Guhe. I am a manager on Co-Impact's program team based in Nairobi, and I'm going to be running the logistics of this webinar. So during this webinar, we plan to share more about the open call, our goals and approach, provide an overview of the grant types and requirements, share details of our application and timelines, and respond to your questions. We have set aside a lot of time for your questions because we did receive quite a few of them, so thank you for sending those in. We also have live translation into French for today's webinar, and our interpreters are Jessica and Shari. So to change the language interpretation, please use the globe icon at the bottom of your screen, and you should see the option for French. So I'm going to pause here for a few seconds for those who would like to do that. We are going to ask that you please limit the chat. There's quite a bit going on already in this webinar, so we do want to kind of keep people's focus in one place. So I'm going to pause now. Please do select the appropriate language option for you. I've also heard that it is helpful to change to English, even if you speak English, it might come across as clearer, particularly for when we're doing cross interpretation. So I'm going to start with a bit of housekeeping. So thank you to everybody who submitted questions in advance through the Slido. In the second half of this webinar, we're going to try and address as many of them as possible. If you have additional questions, please share them using the Q&A button you see on the control panel at the bottom of your screen. So once again, we're going to ask that you limit chat and you use the Q&A function instead. So as part of our agenda, we're going to be sharing our grant types, considerations, and requirements. So we encourage you to wait until after your topic has been covered before submitting an additional question. Everyone but the presenters are muted by default, but we welcome your questions throughout the call through that Q&A function. We'll do our best to get through all the questions, but there may be some that are left unanswered. So thanks for your understanding, as we'll try to get as many questions as we can. And what we will do is take the ones that we aren't able to answer and continue to update our FAQ document online. We are recording this webinar and we'll share the recording and the slide deck with you afterwards. And we'll also be sending out a short 5-minute survey for your feedback on how we did and what we can do to improve. We'd be really grateful for your feedback. So we're going to kick off with introductions. As I said, my name is Guhe. I'm a manager with the programs team at Co-Impact. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Wendia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mary Wandia. I'm Director of Programs based in Nairobi.
Hi, all. My name is Rakesh Rajani. I lead the programs team at Co-Impact. I'm really, really glad that you've all joined the call, and I look forward to doing this webinar together with you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yasmin Madan. I'm also a director on the programs team and joining my colleagues in thanking you all for joining us today. Back to you, Guhen.
Thanks, Yasmin. So this is our agenda for today. So we've divided this call into 4 different segments, followed by a significant amount of time for Q&A. So we're going to start off with the overview of the Gender Fund. Then we're going to go into the 3 different grant types, and then a little bit about our application process and the requirements. And then after that, we will go into the Q&A session, which will be split up into 2 parts. So that will be for the pre-submitted questions that you put in through Slido. We've grouped the questions so that by theme, so to make it more of a coherent conversation. And then finally, we'll go into the live Q&A segment, where we'll be taking the questions that you are submitting through that Q&A function on the webinar. So we're going to ask that you do share your questions sooner rather than later, so we can just capture all of them that are coming in. So I will now hand over to Rakesh to get us started with an overview of Co-Impact and the Gender Fund.
Thank you, Nguhe. So what is Co-Impact? Co-Impact seeks to achieve equitable and inclusive impact at scale. We have made 3 rounds of grants through our first fund over the past 3 years. We focus on 3 sectors of health, education, and economic opportunity to improve outcomes for millions of people. And here's the key point. Everything that we do is focused on systems change. Realigning systems, by which we mean the institutions, policies, and practices that govern systems, and how systems actors experience and exercise power and engage with incentives, norms, and motivations. That sort of realigning of those sorts of things, systems change, is what it takes to get to powerful impact, inclusive impact, impact at scale, and have impact endure over time. Ultimately, we care about changes in people's lives, what we call people-level outcomes. And we believe that the most powerful way of achieving these outcomes is through systemic and institutional change. In short, I would summarize our approach as follows: that we support organizations to change systems so that millions of people can realize their rights and live better lives. Next slide, please. So this open call for country-level grants is for our second fund, the Gender Fund. Our Gender Fund builds on learning from the first fund and has expanded the scope to advance gender equality in 2 important ways. First, while we continue our core focus on systems change in health, education, and economic opportunity, we have added a focus on women's leadership within these 3 sectors. Second, we also look to support institutional change to advance women's leadership in law and economics. These 2 domains have an inordinate influence on public policy, national priorities, and resource allocation. Yet today, women are significantly underrepresented in the academic and professional institutions within these 2 domains of law and economics. You can literally count the number of female central bank governors or finance ministers, for example, in a few hands, which is totally unacceptable. If we get this right, to address systems change, to produce gender equitable outcomes and advance women leadership, we can make truly powerful change. To help make this real, we are looking to Global South, local rooted organizations, and especially those organizations that are led by women to apply for this grant opportunity. I'll now hand over to Yasmin.
Thank you, Rakesh. Next slide, please. So, as Rakesh said, there are multiple ways to advance gender equality. Some organizations focus on technical models or approaches to support government or market systems. Some others aim to strengthen governance or accountability of the systems. Some organizations drive movements to catalyze and sustain change, and some engage in advocacy for policy change or to tackle deep-seated norms. In our Gender Fund, we've developed 3 grant types to increase opportunities for us to support different initiatives across a wide range of organizations. Overall, advancing gender equality requires feminist approaches, dismantling the status quo, addressing structural barriers and exclusion, and reorganizing the rules of the game. Who has power, whose voice is heard, who is included, and who has influence. We recognize the importance of these feminist approaches and so have a few common themes across our grant types. First, we don't define the problem or the solution. You know that best. You know what is holding women and girls back from gender equality in your context. We do prioritize systemic or institutional change across all our grant types so that you get to the structural barriers and the root causes of those problems. And as Rakesh said, we prioritize women-led organizations. Given this, no one grant type is more important than the other. They each have a purpose and requirements that we will now share with you so you can determine where your initiative may best fit to respond to our open call. Next slide, please. So I'll start with the anchor grant. This grant type is to support initiatives that aim to transform systems of health, education, and economic opportunity to advance gender equality. When we say system, it could be a school system or a health system or an agricultural system or a livelihood mechanism. Sometimes there's more than one system involved. If you work in gender-based violence, your initiative may span health and education or economic systems. There are many ways in which you understand and work within systems in these sectors. What really matters is the focus on changing or transforming these systems for impact at scale. To distinguish a bit more, it's not how NGOs directly deliver health programs to improve access to community health services. It is about how organizations strengthen national health system for better community health. It is not about a social enterprise scaling to provide affordable products to low-income consumers, but how national livelihood programs can better incorporate governance and engagement of women and girls in defining and achieving their own economic empowerment. So it is less about creating parallel structures to address the symptoms such as lack of access or affordability, and more about root causes, understanding the challenges to health, education, and economic rights of women and girls so that they have the same opportunities to lead fulfilling lives. Initiatives supported by anchor grants will also have impact at scale. And that means including those who often get left behind by the systems. For us, the last mile means scale, because if something works for the most marginalized and excluded segments of the population, then it works for everyone in a fair and just way. We realize scale can be understood in many different ways. So let me clarify. We're not looking for direct reach or scaling up. That's increased direct delivery or linear scaling of models. We support initiatives that focus on adoption at scale or transformation at scale, focusing on the key levers that need to shift for the system to improve the rights and opportunities for people in an ongoing way. We encourage you to read our handbook that's available online to understand some of these principles that we're sharing when we refer to systems change. There are also several examples on our website of initiatives we are currently supporting across health, education, and economic opportunity. And finally, as systems change takes time, requires patience, our anchor grants provide substantial support, anywhere from 5 million to 20 million, which is relatively flexible funding over a 5 to 6 year period. I will now hand over to my colleague Wandia to talk about the other two grant types we have. Wandia, quick check if you're able to come on. Apologies, everyone. We seem to be having some tech issues, so I will cover the other two grant types. So coming to the next slide, please. Our second grant type is the domain grant. This is a new grant type for co-impact and part of the pathway that Rakesh shared about with this Gender Fund. This grant type is to support initiatives that focus on institutional change to advance women's leadership in the domains of law and economics. We're often asked, what is the difference between economics and domain grants and economic opportunity and anchor grants? The latter, economic opportunity, is about improved economic empowerment in gender equitable ways. The domain economics is about academic and professional institutions that produce economists and leaders who influence public and private policy, who determine resource allocation and national priorities. And the focus here for us is on advancing women's leadership in these institutions within the domains. So what do we mean by the institutions in these domains? We think about them in two main ways. There are critical institutions. These are the main institutions that influence public policy, resource allocation, national priorities, and gender issues. The Ministry of Public Policy, Ministry of Justice, Planning and Finance. As Rakesh said, there's very few women leaders in these across the world. The second type of institution is pipeline or supporting institutions. These could be associations, example, professional associations or networks, or convening agencies or academic institutions, those that create formal and informal pathways into the critical institutions. We realize that there are other ways in which you may think about the institutions, and we're totally open to that, to hearing what makes sense in your context. What matters for us is the focus on institutional change. It is about the institution and not limited to a few individuals. Again, to distinguish, it's about changing policies and practices, those informal and formal rules of the game in how women are hired and recruited, and how recruitment biases are addressed, the networking and mentoring opportunities they get, the support women get to rise to leadership positions and thrive as leaders. As we shared, for this grant type, our goal really is advancing women's leadership. Within this, we welcome your approaches to feminist leadership and collective leadership of women and girls. I want to clarify, we're not looking for outcomes as a result of women's leadership. It's not about instrumentality of women leaders, but it's an important end in itself. We have included a few hypothetical examples in our open call, and we encourage you to refer to those. Our grant for the domain grant, the range is from 2 to 4 million over a 5 to 6 year period. I see my colleague Wandia is back. I will hand over to her for the Catalytic grant.
Thank you, Yasmin. Catalytic grant is also a new grant type for Co-Impact, designed to support women-led organizations. In our consultations, we heard that often women-led organizations are under-resourced and under-supported, and haven't had the time or resources to build out their strategies for larger scale of impact. Hence, 100% of this grant type will be for women-led organizations. Even in this grant type, our ultimate North Star is systemic or institutional change. Catalytic grants are intended to support initiatives that have potential for enduring impact at scale and need time and resources. For instance, to demonstrate viability of taking an approach to scale, or to test scale pathways through a specific system or institution, or bringing together partnerships and form a winning coalition as needed by any systemic or institutional change approach. We are looking for initiatives that will work through the system or the institution to benefit a much larger group, but need time for that scale to manifest. One way to think about catalytic grants is as grants that will nurture initiatives that are either pre-anchor stage, that is focusing on health, education, or economic opportunity, or the pre-domain stage, focusing on 2 domains of law and economics. As seen in this table, we have listed what does and does not fall in this category. The estimated range of catalytic grants is between $1 to $3 million over 3 to 4 years. I will now hand back to Yasmin to talk us through some key things in the application process. Thank you.
Thank you, Wandia. Next slide, please. So I'm going to speak about the requirements by grant type. We shared with you the 3 grant types we have. We hope you see those as windows of opportunity for you to see which one works best for your initiative. And now let's look at the qualifying requirements. Next slide, please. So a hard to read table, but luckily we have included it in our open call document. It's on page 8. These requirements vary by grant type. And in this table, we clarify exactly what is required for you to qualify for each of the grant types. For instance, track record requirements. How many years the organization has been working on the initiative varies by the grant type. Similarly, we require evidence supporting documents for anchor grants, but we recommend it for domain or catalytic. Our requirements for organizational capacity, that is the requirement for financial audits and a minimum budget size, is primarily for the anchor grants, and there is no minimum budget requirement for other grant types. We have received a lot of questions about these already, so please do refer to this table as you determine which grant type you're applying for. We hope this also signals to you that we really are looking to partner with a range of different types of organizations, and that these are additional opportunities for you to apply. I will now speak to the application process. Next slide, please. I will share with you what is required for you to complete your application in our portal. Next slide, please. So we start, there will be an intake form. Right at the beginning, as you enter the application portal, there will be a list of questions to help us get to know your organization and your initiative better. Please be sure to complete these and complete these honestly, as we will be verifying this information. This section will also require you to clarify which grant type you're applying for. It will ask you for a grant preference. As my colleague Wandia and I shared with you in the previous session, the 3 grant types are each a unique window of opportunity to match your initiative. So our application portal allows you to select your primary and your secondary grant preference. Please consider carefully how your initiative focus aligns with these purpose and requirements that we've shared. The primary grant type that you select is what we will reference to score your initiative. During our review process, we may recategorize your grant type to the secondary preference, and this will only apply to those applicants who are invited for the next stage of our process, which is to send us a detailed proposal. Next slide, please. The second thing we require is a concept note. We have provided template and guidelines for you to complete the concept note. Each section of the template includes clear guidance to help you describe various aspects of your initiative. This includes the problem statement, your systems institutional change approach, your proposed impact over a 5-year period, your track record and results to date, the partnerships you have in place, and your team. We have designed to keep this lift light at your end and are requesting a maximum 4-page concept note. We've given you guidance as well as indicated page limits for each section. Please stay well within those page limits. They are there really because we want to minimize the effort required at your end and to ensure that we get the information we need to fully understand and assess your initiative. You will find a PDF template of this on our website, on our application portal, within the open call document itself. I've included a link here for the English version, but our website has the template in all 6 languages, and you can submit your concept note in Word or PDF. Our preference is for you to submit the concept note in English, but we will accept additional 5 languages, including Bahasa, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and Tagalog. This is very much in alignment with our commitment to language justice. Next slide, please. The third part is the evidence summary. Again, we have provided a simple template for you to complete a 1-page summary of your evidence. What we're looking for when we say evidence is really confidence you have that your model works in your context. Tell us, what do you refer to know that you understand the context, the approach you're proposing, and you feel confidence in the impact that you're going to get. We do not require this evidence to be third-party evaluation. We do not require a specific methodology. What we say is, please make it robust and relevant. The closer your evidence is to the context, the approach proposed, the higher you will score. Again, we have included a 1-page evidence summary, a template, and it's a requirement for anchor grants, and it is recommended for domain and catalytic. The template is slightly different. We've got 2 stamps here, but the links are available in our open call document on our website, as well as in the application portal. At this stage, you will not be required to include the actual evidence document or even provide links. As we get further into the process with you, we will request for more detailed documents. Next slide, please. So bringing it all together, here are the things you require: the completed intake form, a simple concept note, a 1-page evidence summary, and then we give you the option to include a 1-page visual. Sometimes a visual is a very powerful way to describe or illustrate your initiative, showing a theory of change or a systems map. That's an optional thing. So we hope this makes it a light lift for you to submit. Our deadline for this is 20th December, and our application portal has been open since 30th September. Please note, we will not have any extensions to this deadline and really encourage you to submit earlier. Our portal is open and you can access it anytime from now till 20th December. If you encounter any technical difficulties, you can email us at the email ID that's included here. As Guhe said, we will share the recording of this webinar as well as the slide deck with you, so you have all these links for your reference. I'm now going to hand back to my colleague Guhe to help us manage our Q&A process with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Yasmin. So we're now going to get into the part of the webinar that I'm sure all of you tuned in for. So we're going to start off with the pre-submitted questions. These are questions that were submitted through the Slido. But before I get into that, I know that there was a lot of information that was shared, and we hope it was clear and useful. So let's all just take 1 minute to take a quick breather and stretch. It is only 1 minute, so don't go too far away. And then after that, we will continue and get into some of the pre-submitted questions. Great. I hope that you've had a moment to just stand up and move around a bit. So we're going to get into our pre-submitted questions. These have been split into 4 categories, looking under both process and the content. So under process, we're going to look at the application process and the requirements. And then under content, we're going to look at the grant types and the considerations for those grant types. Rakesh, I'm going to ask if you can kick us off with talking through some of the requirements under the process.
Great, thanks again, Gue. So I'm going to first address a set of questions around the budget. The question was, what research informed the lead organization budget being pegged to at least 500,000, while over 90% of Global South entities operated much smaller budgets, so say 100,000 to 500,000. And then the next question related to this was, most of the national women's rights organizations in West Africa have annual budgets of between 100 and 500 or 200,000. And so why is COIMPACT's criteria 500,000? Advise if we can still apply if our budget is below 500,000. So first, I would like to note that the 500,000 minimum budget only applies to our anchor grant applications. There is no minimum budget requirement for our domain grants and the catalytic grants. The question was, have we done formal research? So in candor, there was no formal research that has informed our decision. Rather, it is based on our experience with grant making so far, on the types of organizations that are able to best advance systems change and impact at scale that the anchor grants seek to advance. So again, for the anchor grants, you do require to have a minimum $500,000 budget. That's based on our experience. But for the other grants, there is no minimum budget. Next question is also similar. Can smaller organizations that do not have an annual income of $100,000 apply? We have extensive evidence of our work producing impacts. And again, yes, you can apply for the domain and catalytic grants under this window. The next question is, if our existing grants do not exactly overlap with the gender fund grants, can we still count those as match funding as long as it overlaps in future years? And then also another question, can market actors, partners' investments into women count toward match funding? Are we allowed to estimate the value of in-kind contributions? So I think these sets of questions are trying to ask what counts as the additional funding that you need to bring in. and they're seeking clarity on that. So let me try to answer that. So again, our approach is to look at the overall budget required for your initiative, right? So you need to think, this is what I'm trying to do. What's the total budget I need to make that happen? And then we are interested in seeing what are the different sources of funding that you will be able to secure or already have secured. Philanthropic funding, in-country funding from public and private sources. And yes, this includes also in-kind resources. What are all these different sources that you will be able to gather and put towards the initiative's budget? Co-impact generally only funds a part, a significant part, but only a part of your initiative budget and not all of it. For example, for anchor funds, we fund between 25 and a maximum of 50% of the total initiative budget. So you will need to raise funds from other sources, but this funding need not all be in place right at the beginning in year one. The next question was, what is the percentage of indirect or overhead costs that the gender fund will cover on a single project? So at Co-Impact, we do not have a fixed limit or indirect or overhead costs, except for universities where our cap is 15%. We focus on the overall budget of the initiative and rely on you, the applicants, to lay out the case for why the different aspects of the budget, including overhead and organizational strengthening, are important. Let me just sneak in one last question because I see many people have asked this, including right now live. Is in India, the FCRA clause does not allow you to subgrant to other organizations. What would be the implication in a situation where a coalition will apply? And also the question, is the FCRA needed for applicants from India? So what I would say is, first, we do comply with all the laws of a country. So you will need FCRA clearance and a certificate before we can make a grant to you, but you do not need to have it in place at the time you apply. If you feel you are on your way to getting it and will have it in place by the time the grant needs to be made, we welcome those applications. As far as the subgranting requirement, because sometimes many organizations come together, I would say we are big fans of a coalition applying together because we believe it often takes a coalition to achieve powerful change. But we also are aware that FCR regulations limit subgranting. So should a coalition apply and be selected, we will work with you to channel the funding in a manner that enables you to do the work you need to do and also fully complies with the applicable laws. Back to you, Guhe.
Thanks, Rakesh. So we're going to stick with process, and I'm going to go to Yasmin to answer some of the application process questions that we had pre-submitted.
Thank you, Guhe. So I'll start with, question is there a limit to the number of applications an organization can submit? Can an organization submit 3 applications for catalytic grants? Can we submit 3 concept notes within one application, or does each concept note need a separate application? So first, there is no limit to the number of initiatives that an organization can submit for. However, a few things to consider. We're looking to fund initiatives that the organization and its partners are committed to. The initiatives are the core focus of the organization and not just another project in their portfolio. When we look at our scoring, we will consider this. In our experience, systems and institutional change is intensive. It requires an organization-wide commitment at all levels, particularly at the leadership level. So please do consider this when you submit multiple applications. In the application portal itself, you can only include 1 concept note per application. The second question, does Co-Impact have a preference for country-specific or regional approaches? How many regional projects would you consider funding in this round versus projects in individual countries? Do you have a preference for single country projects? We are looking for initiatives that really show a deep understanding of the problem and the context. As we shared with you in the presentation, the systems institutional change work requires understanding the political economy context, doing power analysis, having long-term relationships, bringing together a winning coalition. And all of this deep work happens at the country level. So we do give preference to locally rooted organizations based in the countries where the initiative is proposed. We will consider multi-country, multi-regional initiatives as long as all these criteria are met. Also, the initiatives proposed should focus in one or more countries in our list. Some of you have asked in the live Q&A if we will share that list of countries. Absolutely. This slide deck and this webinar recording will be made available to you right afterwards. I'll take another question. Somebody asked, will you consider applications outside of the listed countries you're invited to apply? And what defines bulk of the work implemented in priority countries? Is this measured by funds spent on number of beneficiaries? What is the threshold? 50%? Our response is, as we said, we will consider regional initiatives with a presence in additional countries, provided the bulk of this work is in those 13 countries. Now, to explain what we mean by bulk of the initiative, from our side, we're really looking at this lens through the system or the institution at the country level and the impact on people's lives. So we expect that the actual work that happens, the actual impact that happens, at least 75% of that will be in the countries in the list. We also recognize that there are many ways in which partners on the ground would approach this issue. So an applicant proposes a regional initiative, we are very open to hearing your compelling case why the bulk of your work will be in the focus countries, and an articulation of how the lead organization and your partners bring deep understanding of the context and a commitment to the issue. I will now hand over to my colleague Wandia to take the other sections.
Thank you, Yasmin. Somebody asked, are improved gender outcomes in health, education, and economics mandatory for anchor grants? If we work on the agency and social norms, are we eligible for anchor grants? Yes, anchor grants are only given to organizations that advance system change and impact at scale in one of the three sectors of health, education, or economic opportunity. We have provided illustrative outcomes in the list of outcomes in our open call and on our website. We also recognize the importance of addressing discriminatory norms, as well as the power and agency of women in how you approach the realization of these outcomes. Somebody else asked, what do you mean by early stage interventions for the Catalytic grant? Do you have a cap on years of implementation? We have a minimum requirement for track record to qualify for Catalytic grants. The lead organization or the consortium or coalition of organizations in the initiative should have worked on the issue for at least 2 years, but not a maximum period. We realize that organizations could be working on an issue for several years, but have not had the resources or support to invest. This grant type is intended to provide that longer runway that organizations need to develop their strategy and partnerships to solve the problem at scale. Another question that was submitted is, what exact institution type do you mean by key institution in law or economic domains? Are community-based government systems eligible? Can civil society organizations apply? During the presentation and in our open call, we provide examples of the types of institutions in law or economics domains that should be the focus of change to advance women's leadership within these institutions. These can either be critical institutions such as ministries of finance, public policy, gender, among others, that determine national priorities, resource allocation, or policies. Or they can be supporting institutions that feed into the critical institutions such as academic institutions, professional associations, or networks. As seen in the evidence, it is important to focus on the policies, practices, cultures, and pathways in these key institutions, as women are currently underrepresented in leadership positions. The organizations working on institutional change can be civil society or community-based organizations. I'm going to hand back to my colleagues Yasmin and Rakesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Wandia. So the question is, are there any must-have outcomes for a program within areas of education, health, or livelihood? Are there any must-have indicators to qualify for a plan? Similar vein, the question is it necessary for health outcomes, people-level outcomes, to be measured by only the outcomes listed in the document, or can other outcomes be chosen as well? So our response is yes. In our open call, we have shared a list of illustrative people-level outcomes that measure impact at population level in health, education, and economic opportunity. We've also shared this list with you in our open call as well as on our website, and you can find the link there. We recognize that applicants work in different aspects within health, within education, and economic opportunity, so we kept these at very broad level. You can adapt these outcomes or propose intermediate outcomes for people-level impact based on your initiative. At a minimum, our requirement is that the outcomes are gender equitable, and our preference is that you also take into account contextual intersectional factors like race, class, caste, identity, and other factors that may be relevant for your context. I want to add another thing. These outcomes matter, but they need to be considered with the power and agency of women and girls and advancement of women's leadership to truly move the needle towards gender equality. So please think in a broader way as you think about your outcomes. The second question is, with respect to modern methods contraceptive prevalence rate, what is considered desirable impact that you feel is within the range of the investment, as well as with respect to disability adjusted life years? Can you provide more details on how DALYs or MCPR need to be measured? Our response is, we rely on you to articulate and specify the impact that you're seeking at the people level and why that matters. We do not have set targets or benchmarks other than that the impact is significant and it's at scale and endures beyond the grant period. We do not also, I want to clarify, require you to use DALYs or MCPR. What we're looking for is which of the outcomes makes most sense for you to be able to have a compelling framework to measure progress in your initiative. We've kept these outcomes at a very, very broad level, so please select and adapt the ones that make most sense for your initiative. I'll now hand over to Rakesh.
Thank you, Yasmin. So the next question was, what is COIMPAC's view on the role of boys and men in a gender initiative? Would incorporating this angle in a proposal bolster an application under review? So the response to that is, look, you are closest to the issues and the context and know best what strategies are needed to address the problems at scale. If you believe that addressing the role of boys and men is critical to advancing gender equality, then yes, we are keen to learn of your problem analysis and systems change model. In particular, we are keen to understand how your approach will shift discriminatory norms and roles in ways that make systems just and inclusive and enable women to exercise leadership. The next question is a practical one, which around period timing is that if October 2022 is when the results will be announced, from which year will the funding start, and will get applied? So I would urge you to look at page 9 of our open call document that's on our website, where we have shared the key steps and the timeline for the selection process. You'll see in there that we hope to make the grants by the end of 2022 for work to start in 2023. Remember that for most grants, though, our process starts with a design grant before you actually jump into the main work. And we encourage you to look at our handbook to understand the purpose of the design grade phase and how that works. So those are the questions in front of me. Back to you, Guhe.
Thank you so much, Rakesh. So we are going to go into Q&A, and we have we have a little bit longer than 25 minutes. I'm going to just reiterate a couple of things just because we've had a lot of questions come in. This slide deck and the webinar recording are going to be available after the webinar, after today, so look out for it within the week. You can share it with colleagues or go over it again, so no need to capture and remember everything that was said today. The second thing is that there's a number of documents that my colleagues have been referring to. We've sent those out in the open call or on our website. If you go to the page with the open call, you will be able to see the FAQ document. And in the FAQ document, we will be updating it with the questions that we don't get to. So currently I'm seeing about 118 questions that have come through. There's almost no way we're going to make it through all those questions, but please do rest assured that we are capturing them, and we will be attempting to answer them through all these different forums. So we're going to kick off with the same categories, and I'm going to start with Yasmin, who's going to talk about the application process.
Thank you, Guhe. And thank you everyone for being so actively engaged and asking questions. We really appreciate, and as Guhe said, we're going to do our best to answer as many as we can. So I'll start with the first question. Are Indian entities required to have FCRA clearance at the time of applying? And our response is, no, you do not need it to be in place by the time you apply, but you need to be well on your way to getting it, because we need the FCRA to be in place before we can make the grant to you. Second question, very similar to what was answered. Is there a limit to the number of applications an organization can apply? I want to reiterate, there is no limit, but what matters really is that this is an opportunity for you to tell us how committed your organization is to the initiative, to understanding the context, and to a long-term just commitment to the cause. So please do keep that in mind. In our application portal, for each application, you can only submit one concept note. Next question, you mentioned that catalytic grants, the focus is on initiatives. We as an organization are testing 3 different initiatives. Can we apply for 3 of them? So clarifying, we support initiatives, and we do that because it's more than a project. For us, it is what the organization is focused on. So yes, if you're working on 3, you can, but again, please consider the leadership engagement, the intensity that is required, and the understanding and the partnerships that you need to bring to a systems or an institutional change initiative. I'll take another one before handing over for other sections. The application will apply together. However, in India, the FCRA rules have in 2020, how will co-impact anchor fund work if there are 3 organizations applying together? This is similar to the response Rakesh gave. We really are big fans of coalitions. We realize how important collaborative work is. So please, when you apply, if there are ways in which we can support having different grants to a single coalition, we will consider that. I'll now hand over to Andia to take the next set of questions.
Thank you, Yasmin. There's a question, I think, that's keeping on coming up. Can we apply for both Anchor and Catalytic grants as one organization with 2 separate program ideas? In addition to what my colleague has said, I would add that the application portal allows you to identify your primary and secondary preferences for the grant type selection. For instance, an organization may apply for a catalytic grant as a primary preference and a domain grant as a secondary preference. The lead organization will have to meet the qualifying requirements of the grant types and align the purpose of the grant with the overall focus of the initiative. Initiatives will first be reviewed as per the selection criteria and scoring system specific to the grant type stated as their primary preference. Then consideration will be given to the secondary preference. Another question that has come in is, can an organization apply for an anchor grant if its focus are people-centered outcomes, such as improving the power and agency among women and girls, and not gender equitable outcomes in health, education, and economic opportunity. Just to reiterate that anchored grants will support system change initiatives that aim to improve gender equitable outcomes and women's leadership in the health, education, or economic opportunity sectors. So you have to be within those three sectors. And remember that even within those sectors, we will still be addressing the issues of power and agency among women and girls. The other question is, would you consider applications that are cross-cutting the different grant types? For example, proposals with anchor and domain grant components. So I think we've answered that in the previous question, that the portal will allow you to classify with your primary and your secondary preference. For catalytic grants, can we request less than $1 million US? Yes, you can, because the average grant ranges and periods are indicative and may be revised based on the needs and context of the different initiatives, as well as our funding envelope. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Rakesh.
Thank you, Wandia. So let me take a couple of questions. The first one was, would tech solutions such as creation of platforms be considered? So I would say, we support initiatives that enable systemic and institutional change, as we've been emphasizing. To be candid, our experience is that tech solutions can be a useful tool, but on their own do not constitute systems change. So if they are part of a systems change effort, yes, but usually on their own, our experience is they don't constitute systems change. I would say look again carefully at the criteria we've laid out around what we mean by systems change. And if you think your approach does, by all means, apply. Next question. What would you prefer, a one-country grant or a multi-country grant? So the short answer is that it is for you to decide. The slightly longer answer is that the systems change we seek is about deep change that requires deep roots and understanding of the context. So in our experience, applications need to focus on one or very few countries, and those are likely to be more compelling. And please also remember that this grant window focuses on funding in only a set of focus countries, right? The list, we will consider funding work in about 13 countries that have been clearly outlined in the open call document. Let me take one more question, which is, how do you define impacting millions of lives? For example, if we train teachers who then reach out to 2 million adolescent girls, is that eligible? So that's a great question. So what do we mean by impacting millions of lives? We mean that millions of lives, millions of people will benefit during the 5 or 6 years of the grant period in a measurable way. So in your example, if you can demonstrate that 2 million adolescent girls will not only be reached, but will actually have a change in outcomes, measurable outcomes in their lives, and it's a meaningful change, then yes, that is absolutely something that we would be interested in seeing and reading your application. Let me turn back to others.
Thank you, Rakesh. I'll pick up a few questions. So the question is it necessary to select a secondary grant type preference, or can one apply to only one grant type? Absolutely, you do not need to pick a secondary grant preference. You may apply for only one, and the portal gives you that option. Next question, how do you define women-led? For instance, having a woman country director help though the CEO is a man? Excellent question. The criteria we laid out is that the primary leader and significant portion of the senior leadership of the anchor organization or the initiative are women. So if the initiative leader is a woman and a significant portion of the senior leadership are women, then we will accept. We also look at the gender composition of the anchor organization's governance structure. So the board having significant or increasing representation of women is also important. Next question, is there a maximum number of partners in collective applications? No, there is no maximum. but please do think about this as the critical partners who are responsible for the success of the initiative. Partnerships are in various forms, and of course, one needs to work with a large set of system actors in your country and context, but who are the critical partners that you want to go together with for the initiative application? Please do consider that. Another question about the anchor grant. If the lead organization is a large institution, example, a university, a think tank with multiple programs, and the application only concerns a specific program within this institution, would the 500,000 budget threshold apply to the institution's budget or to the specific program budget? What we are looking for is this organization capacity to manage large grants. So we would look at the overall budget of the organization and not limit it on a program by program basis. I'm going to hand back now to Wandia.
Thank you, Yasmin. There's a question. Can you please repeat your explanation of the domain of law? Yes. So by the domain of law, we are seeking to support initiatives that focus on institutional change to advance women's ability to enter, rise to, and thrive in leadership positions in the academic and the professional domains of law. So the key thing is institutions of law. There's a question, is there an expectation that the pre-anchor grant project will transform into an anchor grant, mainly in terms of scale after 3 to 4 years of implementation? As we explained, it can be either pre-anchor or pre-domain. So really, it is up to you to seek what is relevant in your context. But this is just to help you nurture that initiative so that it can be able to reach that level. We basically just founded our organization, but we all have been working on gender equality related issues for more than 3 years. We also have possible partnerships with many organizations that we used to work with for this grant. My question is, if we are to apply as lead organization for a second grant type, is it allowed, or should other organizations in the partnerships that lead the application? I think for this, really it depends on your track record on the issue that you have been that you want to work on. So what we need is that at least you have worked on the issue for at least 2 years, if it is domain or catalytic. Then the other question is, can organizations apply regionally and then strengthen program implementation at country level? So as we said, is that we accept country level applications as well as regional applications, as long as the regional or cross-regional applications focus on 1 or 2 of our focus countries. I'm going to hand back to Yasmin or Rakesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Wandia. So we're getting this question in various forms. Can a Southern-based organization that includes an international non-governmental organization from the global North apply? As we shared, we really are committed to funding global South organizations, and we've given criteria 2 out of 3 that you need to meet in our application. We do understand the role that global North organizations bring. There's an opportunity for learning, there's an opportunity for technical assistance, and we encourage that. As long as the global South organization is truly in the lead, then yes, you may have partners who are international NGOs in your coalition or consortium. The next question, can a coalition of social enterprises apply for a domain or catalytic grant? Yes. We do fund not-for-profit, for-profit, and social enterprises. Again, the focus has to be on systems or institutional change. It is not about direct scaling, direct service provision, it is about working through the system or the institution to have enduring impact for millions of lives. Next question. If an organization does not meet the years of experience, can we apply for the grant with an alliance and register as the leaders? I think the spirit here matters. What we are trying to say is we're looking for initiatives that are well underway. They are more mature in an anchor grant, a 3-year requirement for a domain grant, and less time, perhaps like a 2-year requirement for a catalytic grant. Please do consider that have you been working on this, and would one of these grant types be suitable for you? Next question. Our organization has a male founder, but is heavily focused on accelerating systemic change for women in marginalized settings with women-led board and a predominantly female team. Can we apply? So as I shared earlier, the initiative leader or the organization's leader and senior leadership have to be predominantly women. We also look for the board being increasing number of women on the board. But I want to clarify, in our overall portfolio, 75% of the grants will be to women-led. That means we do have room for male-led organizations as well. So please do apply for that. I'll hand back to Rakesh now to take a few more questions.
Thank you, Yasmin. So the question we have is, will the funding have 2 levels like the design and systems change, or is it just one for the gender fund? Great question. So when you put your concept note together, you are articulating there this long-term systems change approach and model that you're going to use. So you're not applying just for the design grant, you are applying for the overall model. If we find it compelling, our typical approach is we make a design grant to you first so that you have the time now to flesh out that model and test certain kind of elements of it and get super prepared to make the system change. So yes, if you are selected, you will first get the systems change grant. You will first get the design grant, which you then work on, and then what follows afterwards, if you have made a compelling case on the design phase, is to get the systems change grant. The next question was, with the domain category regarding the law and/or economics, can the labor market be considered, for example? So just to reiterate something that I think Yasmin emphasized earlier, our focus here is the professional and economic domains of law and economics and the ways in which they create pathways for women to rise into leadership. So this is a really important point. Our core purpose here is how can we help more women rise into leadership and thrive as leaders in economics and in law, in the professional and/or economic domains in these 2 sectors. So it's not about kind of supporting general labor market analysis or work. It is really pathways for women to rise into leadership. Furthermore, what we see is that right now, women are not able to do that because there are institutional barriers. So we are keen to support efforts that seek to make institutional change happen, right? So it's not about scholarships for selected women or kind of projects that help groups. It is really about institutional change in the academic and professional domains of law and economics. Next question. How many applications did you receive and how many did you fund in the previous round? So yes, it's an important question. We receive a lot of applications. In the last round, over 1,000 concept notes came in that we considered, and in the end, we ended up making design grants to 13 of those that came in. Now, 11 design grants, and then we made 2 other grants, so a total of 13 out of the 1,000. So it is competitive. It is hard to get that. But what I would encourage you to do is to, before you take the time and use your valuable time to send in a concept note, look very carefully at the criteria that we've set up and see whether it fits. a lot of those more than 1,000 applications that we received really just did not fit our criteria. And I think, if I'm being candid with you, many of them, had they paid close attention to what we would fund, would have realized that their initiative doesn't fit and would not have applied. So, before, again, you take your valuable time, I urge you to look carefully and say, is this the right opportunity for us? And only apply if you truly believe it is the right opportunity. Last question I will take is, do you allow collaborative applications, example with think tanks for knowledge generation, relevant government departments, etc.? The short answer is yes. We realize that deep institutional change, systems change, often takes a coalition. So we encourage applications that are from a multiple set of actors. Like Yasmin emphasized earlier to one of the questions, do focus on a few critical actors who are going to be responsible for actually leading and making this initiative take place. So yes, we welcome collaborative applications from the key actors who are responsible for making this happen. Back to you, Gue.
Thank you, Rakesh. So we have about, I would say, 20 more minutes. So I'm going to ask if maybe we can pause on asking questions in the Q&A while we take one more round of live questions. As I've said before, we are going to capture these questions and add them to our FAQ document that will be updated and online for you. So if your question doesn't get answered, please refer to that document. So Yasmin, I'm wondering if you can kick us off with another round of the live questions, and then we'll go to Wandia.
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much. You're keeping the questions coming, and we are doing our best to answer as many. And we realize sometimes you may miss a response. So please do know that we will share this recording. We will try and answer the questions by updating our FAQ, as well as share the slide deck with you. We're really keen to answer all your questions, and thank you for your active engagement. So let me take a few more. If we are applying as a coalition, can the evidence come from a mix of those organizations or just from the lead? Such a good question. What we are looking for is the evidence you have that gives you confidence in your model and gives you assurance that you'll achieve the results that you're seeking. So the source can be from your consortium, from the context, what makes most sense for you. It does not have to be directly from the organization. Again, the closer it is to the context, the more applicable it is to your model, the higher you will score. Next question. For the anchor grants due to the pandemic, the past year beneficiary is less than 1,000 children, approximately 6,000 for our organization in India. Can we still apply for anchor grants? Absolutely, yes. We realize what we are again looking for with this 10,000 is that you've been implementing, that you're able to work at scale, that this model is something that you have been working on for some time. So the previous year, because of the pandemic, we realized there have been challenges. Please feel free to refer to the year before to show your impact and your scale. Next question, is there a preference in sectors in health, education, economic empowerment, or is there more? We do not have a preference. We realize these are all foundational sectors. These systems provide the most basic services in the countries to millions of people. What we will look for is a balance over time, but from your side, please do apply to any of these sectors for the area you've been working on. Next question, can local governance structures at community level be considered as critical organizations? So again, I want to clarify, for the domain grants, we're looking at law and economics, right? And what we have seen is that the number of women entering these professions, the number of women surviving and thriving in these institutions and rising to leadership is a real challenge, and women are significantly underrepresented. So we are focusing on these institutions specifically to help advance women's leadership, and that applies for the domain or the pre-domain grants. For the anchor grants, from a systems change perspective, absolutely. Local governance structures matters, community level engagement matters. So please do include that if that is the focus of your initiative. I'm going to now hand back to Wandia to take a few more questions.
Thank you, Yasmin. There's a question here. I saw that consortiums are encouraged for anchor grants, but is it possible to apply as a single organization if we already have big scale? We are a social enterprise focused on social norm change that reaches millions of young people in Kenya. So would like to clarify if we would be eligible to apply alone. I would say that, and maybe Rakesh could come in here, that from our experience, the kind of systemic change that we are seeking requires bringing together partnerships and forming a winning coalition. And so we would be open to hearing more about how you would be able to achieve that. But from our experience is that the kind of change, especially that the outcomes we are looking at under the anchor grants can be achieved better by partnerships and coalitions. You mentioned that the funding for anchor grants is quite flexible. Can you share your approach for catalytic and domain grants? Is the funding flexible or will it require project-based tracking? Just to reiterate that across all our grant types, the North Star is systemic change and institutional change. And so under system change, we are seeking to improve gender equitable outcomes and women's leadership in health, education, or economic opportunity sectors. And under institutional change, we are seeking to advance women's ability to enter, rise to, and thrive in leadership positions in the academic and professional domains of law or economics. And so our grant making across those types is flexible and it is outcome focused. It's not project focused. Thank you. I'm going to hand back to Rakesh or Yasmin.
Thank you, Antia. So let me take, these questions are such great questions and they are really helping us clarify. So thank you. The question I'm going to take is, can organizations apply and potentially selected for both country level and global grants under the Gender Fund? So, you know, we had another window for global and so sorry, let me try that again. Can organizations apply and potentially selected for both country level and global grants under the Gender Fund? Yeah, so because we've had a window of global grants where we reached out to selected groups. The short answer is technically yes. If you feel you have the capacity to do the deep work that is required, yes. But as Yasmin shared earlier, in our experience, systems and institutional change is intensive and requires an organization-wide commitment at all levels, particularly at the leadership level. So do keep that in mind. In our experience, organizations that do lots of different things are unlikely to be able to bring the sort of deep change we want. So we really look to organizations that are super focused on the core initiative of what they do. But if you feel you are able to handle the different elements, yes, do apply. Next question. What is the overall pot of money? Do you have an idea at this stage how many for each grant type that Co-Impact will fund? What will be the maximum amount of grant allocated for an organization at country level is another question. So the grant ranges, including the maximum for each grant, varies across the grant types, right? So it's different for anchor grants and for domain grants and for catalytic grants. And these are all spelled out clearly in the open call document. So please look at it there and you'll get the sense of the range and the maximum that we're there. I want to put in also one informal note here. Typically when a funder says we will fund between X and Y is the maximum, people put in proposals for the maximum amount. But in our case, we will be able to fund very few of the maximum amount, right? So think carefully, what is the most critical amount you need in order to pull off systems change and apply for that amount. Remember, after all, the idea here is that you are influencing, for example, governments and the big resources that governments bring to make systems change happen. So what will be the money you need to play that influence role for the systems change, rather than you needing lots of money to actually deliver services yourself or kind of do lots of things yourself. Because the idea is not about what you do yourself in terms of reaching people. The idea very much is on how you influence a system or influence the institutions to make the change. So again, in our experience, organizations that use budgets that are like super focused in that way are likely to be more compelling than organizations or initiatives that ask for the maximum amount of budget to be able to do lots of things themselves. The next question is as follows. Kindly talk about the co-funding requirement. You have indicated that co-impact support is limited to 25 to 50% of the total philanthropic cost of the initiative. The response, yes, that's absolutely right. We do not fund the full initiative ourselves. We fund only a part of it. It's a substantive part, but we fund a part of it. And you need to have a track record and relationships that show that you have a reasonable chance of raising funds from other donors to meet the full cost of the initiative. You don't need to have raised the money right at the beginning. It's not as if we will only fund you if you show that you've raised all the money, but you do need to convince us that yes, you do, there's a reasonable chance that you'll be able to raise the full cost of the initiative. So use the co-impact money as well as the other money to be able to carry out your initiative. And I'll take one last question, which is around, I think, sub-granting. Can incubators apply, bearing in mind that there will be training, supporting, and funding other organizations to focus on co-impact? So I think what this question is trying to get to is, can an incubator that sets itself up to support all the organizations apply? I think the candid short answer is this grant window is not a good fit for that, because our entire assessment process is designed to assess the strength of a particular and a specific initiative, right? Not essentially a re-grantor like an incubator or a supporter like an incubator. So what we are set up to do is to support specific initiatives that drive the systemic or institutional change. We want to hear about the design and the kind of core features of that initiative, and we will assess that to see how compelling it is. And incubators are not really set up for that, to fit this criteria. Then, with that, I'll hand back to who's taking the next set.
Thank you, Rakesh. Happy to take some more. So, we've been getting a lot of questions on geography, asking about the focus countries, which ones, there are priorities amongst those, and if we fund countries outside that list. So I think it bears repeating. We have 13 countries in our consideration set. Within these, we encourage applicants to submit their applications for the initiatives that they're working on. We will also fund multi-country or multi-regional, and again, our preference is that is primarily in these 13 countries. If you are working in a country that's outside of this list, then as a single country initiative, that will not qualify for our consideration. If it is a multi-country initiative, then again, the bulk of the work has to happen in the focus countries. Finally, within those focus countries, at the moment, we do not have a preference. So we encourage all the initiatives working in the 13 countries in our list to apply for the relevant grant type. Next question, systemic change often requires governments. So would you fund either government-led initiatives or multi-stakeholder national coalitions with government representation or co-lead? Yes, we would. We would consider those, and we recognize the importance of working within systems, with systems, and in government partnerships. Next question, do you fund for-profit organizations led by women? Would you, for instance, invest in machinery, example, sanitary pad making machines? So we will, I'm going to answer this question in 3 parts. We will fund for-profit organizations as long as the focus, again, is on the system or the institution, right? This is not about one organization providing direct services, in this case, affordable, high-quality products to people. It is about making the system work for the women and the girls. So for-profit, yes, but in case of investing in machinery for direct delivery, that is not likely to be something in our consideration set. Next question. Systems change and solving the root problems requires solving a series of nuanced issues across the value chain, be it education, healthcare, or economic opportunities. Some of these issues affect everyone, irrespective of gender, and then there are issues that affect women more than anyone else. Do you have a preference between these two? And are you looking for impact across the value chain addressing a series of issues? Such a good question and so many layers. So first, our gender fund, as Rakesh shared the vision right at the beginning, is to advance gender equality. So far, what we have seen is women are excluded, underrepresented, do not have control and agency and power. Women and girls are held back because of discrimination and restrictive norms. And so we are really focusing on addressing these, on systems that have created structural barriers for women and girls. And I want to clarify here, when we say women and girls, we are using this in a very inclusionary way for all of those on the spectrum who identify as women and girls. When you fix problems for women and girls, as is the vision of gender equality, it benefits everyone. So we do look at our impact in terms of people, but the outcomes have to be gender equitable. They have to consider women's leadership. They have to focus on the power and agency of women and girls. So I hope it's a really nuanced question, and I hope that answers. In terms of the working across the value chain, absolutely. When you think of market systems, it really isn't one point, it is across the value chain. So we encourage initiatives that are looking for impact across that value chain. Another question, in terms of targeting critical key institutions, can we focus on women's leadership and systemic change in the local governance system? Example, at a village level. Yes, in our anchor grant, we actually currently are funding an initiative in India that is looking at women's representation and leadership in local governance structures. So we do encourage those. For women's leadership in the domains of law and economics, again, there's a precise way in which we're thinking about those institutions to advance women's leadership. So please do look at that grant type. I'll now hand back to Andia to take a few more questions.
Thank you, Yasmin. There are two questions here that are linked. Very often policy change and law change work and advocacy is better and more effective when done outside the critical organizations. How do you look at that? Sometimes working within the organizations is not the best strategy. The second question is, does the domain of law include improving outcomes for women in politics? As Yasmin had indicated earlier, is that under the domain grants, what we are really interested in is a focus on institutional change, exactly to address those barriers or blockages that prevent us from working within those institutions, and especially enabling women to enter, to thrive, and to rise into leadership positions within those domains. And that's why we are focusing on the informal and formal rules of the game, how women are hired, how recruitment biases are addressed, what networking and mentorship opportunities they get, and how women get supported to rise to leadership position. So really our focus is institutional change to advance women's leadership. The other question that has come is, how many projects will be funded under this open call? Can you provide a range, preferably for each of the 3 grant types? For this round of funding, we expect to fund 15 to 25 initiatives across the 3 grant types. We remain flexible in terms of region and grant type allocation, but we will also aim for a balance across regions and grant types. Another question is, can you cite 1 or 2 examples of catalytic grants made in the past? Illustrate through examples how these grants scored on key evaluation criteria. This is a new grant type for us. During our consultations for the Gender Fund, we learned that many women-led organizations had not had time or resources to build out their strategies and invest in their organizational strengthening needs. And that is why 100% of the Catalytic grants will be awarded to women-led organizations. Our evaluation criteria are similar across all grant types, but for Catalytic grants, we require less in terms of deep track record of large-scale impact, evidence, and financial systems. Another question is, for the Catalytic grant, do you have to have at least 2 years of existence? Yes. This grant type is not for initiatives that are in a much earlier stage of their idea. For this reason, we require a track record of having worked on the issue for at least 2 years. As shared in our presentation, this grant type is intended to give women-led organizations the time, resources, and support they need to develop their strategies for systemic and institutional change for impact at scale. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We're coming right close to the end of our time. Thank you so much for submitting all these really great questions. We really do appreciate it. And we're also learning so much. I'm just going to put in the chat the Gender Fund, how to apply. If you scroll down, you will see a lot of our supporting documents do exist. On the website. As I've said a couple of times, our FAQ document will be updated and we will be sharing the recording of this webinar plus the slides as well. Finally, as you can see from all the information that we've shared, this grant opportunity is not for everyone. There are many terrific organizations doing really powerful work that may not fit the criteria we've laid out, but some definitely do. So if you feel that this opportunity with the Gender Fund is right for you, we would love to hear from you. Please do apply and do so via our online application in good time before the December 20th deadline. Thank you for your interest and for joining us and for giving us your time. We're grateful to you and for the important work that you're all doing. We look forward to learning more and more and being in touch very soon. Thank you so much for your time. Bye, everyone.